Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for the solar eclipse at 0 degrees of Cancer on June 21st, 2020. In my time zone, it's at 1:42 a.m. That is the Midwestern or Central time zone. Actually, if you're in the Pacific time zone, it will be after midnight as well. So I'm assuming it will be on the 21st in the world. And this is coming on the heels of the solstice time. And so we have very potent energy, a lot of change, obviously with the seasons changing, which is what the solstice in part is all about. It's at the point of the cardinal point of the sun going into Cancer, which is supposed to be the start of summer in the Northern Hemisphere, winter in the Southern, and its counterpart Capricorn in December. And so when we're talking about the solstice, let's just talk about that for 1 second. Because we're talking about an apex or a nadir. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, where, the lowest point or the highest point, the apex. When you're talking about the summer solstice, right? That's when the sun is at its peak power. And I was just thinking about this because I always make a joke. I don't even want to say the word winter. I have lived in the Chicago area my whole life. That's like the last thing I want to do because winters tend to be very harsh where I live. But what happens at the winter solstice? The very next day, you're going to be seeing the sun ascending, and you're going to gradually start getting more and more light. The one thing about the summer solstice, as much as I love it, is then we start to get the decline. And it's just when summer's starting to kick in, and we're already starting to see that decline. So it just seems like the timing is off, But anyway, I can't change anything about the solstices or seas. But what I did want to say is that when the sun goes into a cardinal sign, we're talking about change. So we're also looking at the equinoxes in March and September as changes in those seasons, and all in cardinal signs. So that is occurring, and if you are observant enough, you might look in the collective, you might see if there are more headlines, if it seems like a lot more stuff happening in general, and like it seems to me that there's a quickening in the energy when we have it, like just in the Northern Hemisphere in March when we have the beginning of spring. The Aries energy seems to make things really start to kick in. So at the time of this solstice, it isn't more than a few hours later, I believe. I don't have the time of the solstice, the exact time. But then we have this solar eclipse at 0 degrees, the 0 point. And 0 is, as a number or non-number, is about pure potential. And so when you're talking about a solar eclipse, which is a very powerful new moon, that can certainly be a time when you feel this ability, or there is an ability, to program something at the deepest level in terms of the intentions that you set. The interesting thing about this particular solar eclipse is that at the time that it occurs, we have just begun a Mercury retrograde. And that Mercury retrograde happens to be in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is the sign the sun goes into at the time of the solstice and the solar eclipse, albeit at 0 degrees. So we're looking at that cusp of Gemini and Cancer. And to me, there is really that sort of collective energy because Gemini rules the 3rd house, which is connected to communication, news, and that sort of thing. And I couldn't help but notice that the Mercury retrograde is happening at 14 degrees of Cancer. 14 is the number of the scribe. I mean, because it reduces to a 5, which is connected to Mercury. So it vibrates to what it represents. So I feel like the experiences that we're having at the collective level, which we already have been having for months now. Obviously, we always have things that happen that tie us all together, but it seems like in the last few months, this has just accelerated. And I feel like there's a spiritual reason for this, the idea of unity. But with Mercury being in Cancer and retrograding and knowing what I know about Cancer, Cancer is associated with memories and history. And so remembering where we've been becomes even more crucial now because we don't want to make the same mistakes. And to me, with some of the hard angles to Neptune, and even the conjunction between Mars and Neptune, it can be falling for the okie doke. It can be allowing ourselves to be manipulated by lies. But manipulation means that our emotions are engaged. And if you are an empath, if you are somebody who considers yourself a sensitive person, trying to be detached about things that have touched you emotionally may even seem wrong. But the thing is, when we're running on emotion, when we're being manipulated and don't even know it sometimes, we might think we're being this great person, but we're trying to prove that we're a great person. And we don't necessarily believe that deep down inside. So I've talked about this before when I was talking about the full moon or the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. A lot of these things are still in play here, even at the end of June. And specifically what I'm referring to are the sun and the moon squaring off to Mars. I think that was true back then too, because it was in Gemini. So it was forming a square with Mars and Pisces. And Mars and Pisces can shoot itself in the foot just by itself. If any of you have natal Mars and Pisces, you may laugh at that and know exactly what I'm talking about. Because Mars spurs us to action, but Pisces can be a person's worst enemy because, again, allowing a person's emotions to do something misguided. The heart might be in the right place, but it still can be misguided. And, it's so important to do things with clear intentions, I feel. And it's very hard when you have these squares from the sun to Neptune, the moon to Neptune, because the person isn't quite sure, where they're at. Neptune can bring distortion. And part of that distortion is over idealizing various situations and, putting on those rose-colored glasses and seeing things as you want to see them, not how they really are. With the Sun to Neptune, not understanding who you are, being too willing to be influenced by the outer world. The Moon square Neptune, being dissatisfied with just about everything, or creating this fantasy version of life that doesn't exist and looking for the Shangri-La. The squares to Mars are also here. Now we have a square from the Sun to Mars, which is defensiveness, competitiveness, but it's really trying to prove oneself. I think sometimes the person that you're trying to ultimately prove yourself to is yourself. So to me, it's almost like fighting against yourself, not accepting yourself. Now, of course, other people can come in the way and you can project onto them, but it's really, to me, still an internalized dissatisfaction. The Moon square Mars is acting on impulse, acting on emotions. That is always something that is, a risky thing to do. Now, sometimes we take chances, and the Moon can be your intuitive guide, and they can work out very well. But if the emotions are engaged in any kind of a negative way, that's when it can be problematic. And at the time of this solar eclipse, it's in Cancer, so it's very emotional, being a water sign. So I just want to talk a little bit about that Cancerian energy. Cancer rules the 4th house of home and family, nurturing in general, the mother. And the mother represents, the Moon is the ruler of Cancer, and the Moon represents our emotions and our nurturing instincts ourselves. How do we nurture others? How do we nurture ourselves, maybe you could say? And this can also involve the health and things like that. And with when we're talking about Cancer, so you have like the double kind of Cancer energy because the Moon is in its own sign. And so sentimentality can come up, which is really, that's okay. The kind of the more challenging aspect of sentimentality is being maudlin, being overly sentimental. But sentimentality is simply looking at the past and thinking of good times that you've had. The problem is when the person distorts things and acts like everything was perfect then, everything sucks now. And that is rarely the case. That something was so great way back when, and now it isn't. Usually what is happening is a person is using the past as an excuse to get out of their own responsibilities, which is, happiness is an inside job. Nobody can give that to you. What I'm seeing here, because we're having this Mercury retrograde, which can also bring people, during the time of this solar eclipse, we have several planets retrograde, but Mercury is newly retrograded, retrograding just a few days earlier in Cancer. And we also have the Venus retrograde is still in effect. We have also the Jupiter, but getting back to the Venus, because like Mercury, it's an inner planet, our personal planet. Both of those inner planets can point to people from your past coming back into your life. And the sentimental part of things is something to consider, because if somebody comes back into your life, you have to ask yourself, why did they leave? And if you're just not willing to even entertain that question, then it points to being in La La Land. that Neptunian influence, the moon square Neptune, la la la, I can't hear you, type of thing. One thing that is so great here is that we have Mercury's trining Neptune, which is great for that 0 point, for tuning into things that you wish to create that have never existed before. When you're working with energy that is connected to new moons, which this is, new moon on steroids, solar eclipse, you're looking at, in some cases, when you're launching something, doing, kind of taking something that you already have and improving it, or, adding to it in some way. But the 0 point of the degree can indicate something new being birthed at this time, that even if you're listening to this 10 days in advance, you may not be aware of what that is. So that's the exciting part of this, is that creativity can be off the charts. And the Mercury trine Neptune may be an example of that. We have Jupiter sextiling Neptune as well. And Jupiter is very expansive, and seeing the best within Neptune and what it represents, kind of representing, connecting in a very positive way with Neptune. And even Pluto is forming a nice angle to Neptune, a sextile as well. So Pluto actually has a conjunction from Jupiter. And it was interesting. I was just reading about something, about this online, because people tend to go right for the negative when they're talking about any types of conjunctions with Pluto, which is absurd. I mean, even with Jupiter, I think I read in the past people talking about this because of that idea of kind of exaggerating the Pluto tendencies. Actually, this is very good for people to strengthen their self-empowerment. There are several indicators of this being a potential, because Saturn is forming a conjunction with Pluto as well, and I've heard bad things about that because, they're two malefic planets and they're combining, so it's got to be something bad. Well, actually, that's just one way of looking at it, That's the glass half empty. You can look at what the benefits of Saturn, the benefits of Pluto, and what do they both represent. We have discipline coupled with personal power and the desire to transform. If you have somebody who is very disciplined, but they have no desire to really change their life fundamentally, they may function and they go through their life. And then, I think that is not all that uncommon, unfortunately, that people just, wash, rinse, repeat, and they're able to function on a material level. And that's what I would say with Saturn, that material level, but they're not able to, and I think it's actually a form of expansion. So I'm glad Jupiter is in the mix. All three of them are combining. But I think that we need to have that transformation agent in order to expand. Doing the same thing every day for the rest of your life may create stability, and that's certainly what Saturn would represent, but there's not expansion, and I feel like that's what life is about. The ultimate, the higher aspiration of life is to always, it's not just self-improvement, it's expansion, growth. So that's where Jupiter comes into the mix. But Pluto is part of that change agent through deep diving, and also occasionally tearing down things, tearing down structures that are no good. Sometimes I've seen beautiful Victorian houses, but they're rotted out, maybe with termites. The facade is still there, but it's really so rotted out that it cannot be just repaired. So what do? You have to demolish it and start anew. That's not a bad thing. It might be sad sometimes because you don't want to lose the old structure, but that's how it has to be if it's rotten to the core. This is experienced in a societal sense with Pluto and Capricorn, because Capricorn rules these structures. It's ruled by Saturn, so it's going to affect these worldly structures. But in the moment, it feels very chaotic, definitely. But you can't be too addicted to complacency and safety. Sometimes those things can keep people in a very comfortable tomb. I find it interesting that Neptune goes retrograde just a couple of days after this solar eclipse, because it seems to me that it's almost like the hangover and realizing what you said and did, and not being able to really understand why you did it. And this is for people that are not conscious, that are running on emotion. For other people, this can be just a sobering effect of realizing that dreams may have to be reworked in some cases. It depends on where Neptune falls in your chart. It's in its own sign of Pisces, but it does reflect that. And then one thing that I think will be kind of a relief, if you will, amidst all these retrogrades, is that Mars goes into its own sign of Aries on the 27th of June. And so that helps to kind of light a fire under us, because we're kind of, I'm not going to say we're drowning in water, but we do have a lot going on. The sun is in Cancer. We have Mercury in Cancer, Mars in Pisces up until that point, and then of course Neptune also in Pisces. And it's good to have some fire to kind of move us forward, because again, Cancer can keep us longing for the past, maybe a little bit sad or nostalgic, melancholy, because thinking of the past. And I think this is already kind of seeping into everything, perhaps because Mercury is already in Cancer at the time that I'm recording this, on the 11th of June. So it's already having that influence. And it's funny because I'm looking here to see where the moon is at, and the moon is in Pisces. So that certainly doesn't, I was going to say doesn't help things, but I don't mean anything bad about water signs. It's just that that emotion just getting stoked. And being tied to the past, for sure. So anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you are able to think about that period of time, think about the kind of things that you want to bring into fruition that maybe you haven't even thought about until just now, because it seems like we're really starting over again in one way or the other, with these two major astrological events happening back to back, the solstice and then the new moon, or the solar eclipse at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. Okay, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.